Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're setting our sights on a state that absolutely perfectly captures the complex, ever-evolving American story. You guessed it, we're looking at Ohio. It's a state whose history really is just a sweeping epic, from ancient cultures and frontier expansion right through to industrial might and a pretty massive modern transformation. Let's dive right in.
Now, why is this single Midwestern state the ultimate barometer for America? It's a bit of a provocative question, right? But honestly, when you really look at the data, it makes total sense. Ohio's history practically mirrors the nation's own evolution. It went from being this hotly contested frontier territory to a literal colossal industrial giant. And now? Well, now it's navigating the pretty complex waters of a post-industrial landscape. Basically, if you want to understand where America has been, and maybe more importantly, where it's going, you absolutely have to understand Ohio.
The state's official slogan is the heart of it all. And honestly, Ohio really is the quintessential American crossroads. It's this key Midwestern state, deeply shaped by heavy industry, bustling major cities, quiet small towns, vast agricultural plains, and, as we'll see, some significant political realignment. It's essentially a microcosm of the entire United States.
So here's our roadmap for today. First up, geography and indigenous roots. Then, frontier to Ohio statehood. Number 3 is industry and major cities, moving right along to economy and changing demographics, followed by politics, culture, and identity. And finally, we'll wrap up with challenges and the future.
Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, Geography and Indigenous Roots.
So, a lot of people think Ohio is just one continuous flat plain, but actually, scratch that, it's definitely not. Up in the northwest and central parts, sure, you have these glaciated till plains. These are exceptionally flat areas that historically even included the massive Great Black Swamp. But if you head over to the southeast, you find the unglaciated Allegheny Plateau. We're talking rugged hills, dense forests, and a really deep coal mining legacy that shares a strong socioeconomic kinship with neighboring Appalachia. These two totally distinct landscapes really set the stage for very different types of settlement and industry later on.
And the Ohio Valley was far from an empty wilderness. Nomadic inhabitants were here way back, as early as 13,000 BC. Fast forward to about 1000 BC, and the Adena culture emerges. They were building these complex, semi-permanent villages and just incredible earthworks, like the famous Great Serpent Mound. But moving forward into the mid-17th century, things brought immense instability during the Beaver Wars, right as the Iroquois expanded their trapping grounds. And then, tragically, despite centuries of deep connection to the land, waves of disease, warfare, and highly aggressive federal removal policies culminated in 1842. That was when all remaining native tribes were forced out of the state entirely.
All right, moving into Section 2, Frontier to Ohio Statehood.
So, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This was absolutely crucial legislation. It created the Northwest Territory and paved the way for Ohio. But here's what you really should take away from this. It explicitly prohibited slavery. That was a huge deal. It set an incredible precedent, ensuring that when Ohio finally joined the Union in 1803, it entered as the very first post-colonial free state. And as you can probably guess, that firm anti-slavery foundation would have massive, massive implications for Ohio's role in the years to come, especially during the Civil War.
And we really can't talk about early Ohio without mentioning Rufus Putnam. People often call him the father of Ohio, and for good reason. He was instrumental in that Northwest Ordinance we just talked about, but he also organized the Ohio Company of Associates. He literally led a group of American Revolutionary War veterans to settle at Marietta, effectively compensating them with land for their military service. The guy pretty much mapped out the future of the state, literally setting aside land for schools and laying the early groundwork for formal civilization in the territory.
That brings us to Section 3, Industry and Major Cities.
Geography pretty much completely determined the destiny of Ohio's 3 largest cities, often called the 3 Cs. Up north, Cleveland became an absolute titan of coal, iron, and of course, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, all thanks to its prime location right on Lake Erie. Today, though, it's pivoted into a huge hub for healthcare, home to the world-famous Cleveland Clinic. Then, right in the middle, you have Columbus. Because of that central geographic location, it became the state capital, eventually evolving into a powerhouse for finance, research, and obviously, Ohio State University. Finally, down south, Cincinnati thrived thanks to the Ohio River. Early on, it was this massive pork and meatpacking center, which, funny enough, paved the way for modern consumer giants you definitely know, like Procter & Gamble and Kroger.
But wait, how did the state as a whole become such a crazy industrial juggernaut? Well, it was really a step-by-step evolution in infrastructure. First, we're talking the super ambitious construction of canals in the early 1800s. Get this, they literally built Grand Lake St. Mary's, which was the largest artificial lake in the entire world at the time, just to supply water to that canal system. Wild, right? Next up came a sprawling railroad network. That became absolutely vital for moving Union troops and supplies during the Civil War. And that rail connectivity led directly into the explosive rise of heavy steel production in places like Youngstown and Cleveland. By the 1940s, all of that massive built-up momentum culminated with huge factory conversions, producing just unimaginable amounts of military equipment for World War II.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Economy and Changing Demographics.
Now, if you thought Ohio was still just steel mills and car factories, the modern reality might actually surprise you a bit. Yes, manufacturing is definitely still massive. It makes up 18.3% of the economy, and Ohio actually has the third largest manufacturing workforce in the whole country. But consider what rivals it now. Financial activities also sit right there at exactly 18.3%. Trade and transportation actually lead the pack at 19.4%, and education and healthcare, that represents a huge 15.8% chunk. So the big takeaway here is that Ohio is now a deeply diversified, service and information-driven economy.
But as you might know, getting to that level of diversity was incredibly painful. Between 1990 and 2019, Ohio lost over 300,000 manufacturing jobs. That is a massive, crushing wave of deindustrialization that completely reshaped entire communities practically overnight. Yet, and this is key, in that exact same period, the state added over 1 million non-manufacturing jobs. So this perfectly illustrates a state that isn't just in some simple decline, but rather one going through a massive, fundamental economic transition.
Moving on to Section 5, Politics, Culture, and Identity.
So what is the actual day-to-day cultural fabric of Ohio? Well, it's honestly this rich, amazing tapestry heavily shaped by immigrants and innovators. Down in Cincinnati, German immigrants gave us goetta, which is this really unique breakfast sausage made with oats. Up in Cleveland, the Polish boy is basically the signature sandwich. We're talking a kielbasa absolutely loaded with fries and barbecue sauce. In Columbus, you've got the legendary Johnny Marzetti beef and noodle casserole. But beyond the incredible food, Ohio is famously the birthplace of aviation, thanks to the Wright brothers over in Dayton. And of course, you can't forget the sports. The people here share this fierce, almost legendary loyalty to their professional sports teams. Whether we're talking the Reds, the Browns, the Bengals, or the Cavs, it's a very lived-in, intensely human culture.
But, that diverse population has also made Ohio famous for something else entirely: politics. Historically, Ohio has been the ultimate American swing state, acting as a perfect demographic bellwether for presidential elections. However, recent political realignments, largely driven by those varied demographic and economic changes we just talked about, have resulted in consistent successes for Republican candidates since the late 2000s. Because of this, many political analysts are now actively questioning whether Ohio still retains its traditional role as a true 50-50 electoral battleground.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 6, Challenges and the Future.
To really understand where Ohio is today, we have to look at a pretty specific number, 12.8%. That's the state's union membership rate as of 2022, and it grounds this whole narrative in a pretty stark reality. See, back in the year 2000, 17.4% of Ohio's workforce were union members, so we've seen a really significant drop. And this decline goes hand in hand with the loss of that traditional heavy manufacturing we mentioned earlier. It represents major shifting labor dynamics and a very real challenge for the working class populations that originally built the state's historical wealth.
So with all that in mind, how is the state government actually responding? Well, they're actively trying to pull Ohio straight into the green and high-tech economies of the future. They are aggressively pushing to offset those older manufacturing losses by pivoting to things like solar energy and electric vehicle production. Plus, they've actually spent decades investing in the state's technology and bioscience sectors through big initiatives like the Third Frontier program. The goal? To make absolutely sure the state doesn't get left behind in the 21st century economy.
Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. As Ohio navigates this incredibly complex shift from a roaring industrial past to a high-tech, post-industrial future, what does its transformation actually tell us about the road ahead for all of America? Because think about it, if Ohio truly is the heart of it all, if it genuinely is the ultimate barometer for the nation, then the challenges it is trying to solve today are very likely the exact same challenges the rest of the country is going to face tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into the evolving American Midwest leaves you as completely fascinated by Ohio as I am.